On today's show, we are joined by Bobby Blanco from MASNsports.com, and Bobby is going to help us wrap up this 2024 season. And the first intro question here is, how would you describe the 2024 Nationals? It's trickier than you think.
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And of course, I'm your host, Ryan Clary. You can catch me over on Twitter at RyanClary11 and as well as our show page at LO_Nationals. For all your latest Nationals news and notes, make sure to check us out over on Twitter. And while you're at it, search up Locked On Nationals wherever you get your podcasts, including over on YouTube. Again, just search Locked On Nationals and hit that subscriber button. Leave a comment, leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whatever you may desire. I will be fine just then and there. Later on in today's show, we're going to get some playoff predictions as postseason baseball starts today. And Bobby Blanco from MASNsports.com, he's joining us today. So we'll get his predictions a little bit later on and some World Series predictions as well from Bobby, as he's been a staple on the show all season long. He's going to make a postseason prediction on the record right here and right now. Or not right here, right now, but later on today, Bobby. Don't get your hopes up just now. But we'll also get in some highlights and lowlights of the 2024 Nationals. And then, of course, this is going to be a kind of a breakdown show of the 2024 Washington Nationals. Again, we are joined by Bobby Blanco from MASNsports.com. But before we get into anything, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So, Bobby, how are we doing on this rainy Tuesday morning here in DC?
Yeah, it's been gross out. Happy offseason, Ryan. Kind of gross, disgusting. You mentioned playoff baseball. I'm actually headed up to Baltimore to watch the O's game this afternoon, and I'm hoping this rain gets out of here so we don't have any delays and can kind of enjoy watching a postseason game as a fan as opposed to covering it as a reporter. But other than that, happy the offseason's here and can kind of take a little bit of a breather.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I am kind of happy the offseason is here because this national season did kind of drag on a little bit. Like, there were portions of this season and really dating back into June where not people were taking it too serious, but like there were portions of the summer where the Nationals were like 2.5 games back from wild card spot. Like, no one was really expecting them to be in the race, but like there were portions of the season where you were like, what if? And it wasn't that crazy to even think of that scenario. But as we know now, the Nationals, they finished the season yet again, 71 and 91 for back-to-back years. And Bobby, just overall, how would you like describe this Nationals team to someone who may not fully understand the landscape here in DC?
Yeah, well, I mean, I asked the same question to Davey Martinez on the last day of the season, and I asked him this last year, 2022 to 2023, that was a 16-win improvement. And, we were here talking about, like, what a great year for the Nationals. I mean, that's awesome, like, that they were able to win 16 more games from one year to the next in this rebuild. That really kind of kickstarted this thing. And when I asking them about that at the end of 2023, they were like, well, it's not a successful year. We still lost 91 games, but it was an improvement. It was development. So I thought that answer was interesting. So I asked Davey again on the last day of the season. You didn't call last year a success. This year, you might finish with the same record. You might finish with one win better. So how would you describe this year? And he had to think about it for a second, and he said experience. And I think that was a good answer. We're talking about a lot of young players who, for the majority of the season, were the focal points for this major league team. I mean, if you think back to last year, there were still a lot of veterans that were taking a lot of the big at-bats, innings, and stuff like that. This year was almost all young guys, and you have the emergence of James Wood, Dylan Cruz, James played the last 3 months of the season. Dylan played the last month plus. You have a starting rotation where Jake Irvin, Mackenzie Gore, Mitchell Parker, DJ Hers are all making consecutive starts, every 5 days, starting basically when DJ came up in, June? So, it was – I know they end up with the same record. So you could point to that and be like, that's not an improvement from last year. But I still think that the experience they got and the guys that made an impact on the club this year, CJ Abrams being an all-star, Luis Garcia Jr. having a renaissance year, Gabriel Ruiz having a strong second half, Jacob Young becoming a Gold Glove candidate, if not Platinum Glove candidate in center field, and then all those other guys I mentioned. I think this, yes, the win-loss record is the same, but I still think this was a positive step forward for this Nationals rebuild. And you have to think, too, that this record, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, this team was, I think, so much better than last year's version of this team from top to bottom. I mean, you got to go back to, we were talking about how, it kind of dragged on. You have to remember, back in June, they were teetering around 500 for most of that month. And as we got closer to the All-Star break, we were like, okay, maybe not actually a wild card team, but they're right there in the mix. And if they can get above 500, what a different story we're talking about here for the season. They kind of not fall apart, but kind of fell off a little bit at the end in the second half. They played a really tough schedule in the second half. A lot of competitors, faced a lot of those teams that are now going to be in the playoffs. So that was tough. But I still think that overall, even with the same record, this was an improvement from last year. This team performed better than it did last year. And I think they're setting themselves up nicely for a strong 2025 campaign.
Like you mentioned a lot of great things there, because last year, the difference is between 2023 and 2024 was that you had like all these veterans early on in the season who were in the lineup, and like that's fine and all, but you want to see, like, I would prefer to have my team struggle with like the potential future of the Nationals like we did this year than to have like kind of like these stuttering veterans where you didn't really know what they were going to do. You're just kind of hoping that you would trade them off at the deadline. And some guys like Jammer Candelario were a big success story here, and you traded them off for DJ Hers and Kevin Madej, who's sitting down in the minors as well. But I think the big difference between last year and this year was that this really was more so of a development year. And I think we got to see that a lot. Like last year, the big story in the second half was seeing CJ Abrams develop and steal just every single bag, every single time he was on base. It was awesome to see that. But like this year, you had DJ Hers in the rotation, Mitchell Parker in the rotation. You've seen guys like James Wood come up and make a huge impact and really solidify himself as a future here in DC. And even then, the first half of the season, CJ Abrams as well was an all-star, and he was truly an all-star. His numbers lined up exactly to that. So I think this year was kind of like laying the groundwork for what's to come here in DC. And you've got more prospects coming up through the pipeline here with Brady House. You've got a couple pitching prospects as well. And also, even then, like while we are talking about the younger pieces, you lost one of your better rotation pieces early on this summer with Trevor Williams. I think that did play a pretty big part in the kind of the Nationals falling off here in the second half, but he came back. He looked really good. So the Nationals, like, I do think they were a lot better than what their record indicated. And I think there's a lot of things to build on in 2024 compared to 2023. So when people are like, well, you didn't really improve, you were 71 and 91, like, yeah, it would have been nice to see more wins, but I see the future more this season than what I did last year, if that makes any sense, Bobby.
Yeah, I think that all ties into kind of Davey's answer, and what I'm sticking with is an experience, right? Like you look at the last lineup for the last game of the season, you have guys like obviously staples like Luis Garcia Jr., but then James Wood, Dylan Cruz, who we mentioned, but then you also have Juan Yepes, a guy who was signed on a minor league deal that proved to be a pretty solid piece. Maybe he comes back next year and just adds depth to the organization. They sure need it. But then Jose Tena, Drew Millis, Jacob Young, Nassim Nunez. I mean, the the everyday players near the end of the season. Don't forget about Andres Chaparro, who ended up on the paternity list last week of the season. He was an everyday player before the birth of his kid. So, it was a lot of – we saw more young guys playing every day down the stretch than we did last year. And I think, one, that kind of ties into how many games they lost because, it is a younger lineup and, the offense surely struggled those last couple of weeks of the season. But, that's all valuable experience for all those guys heading into next year. And, Dylan Cruz, James Wood mentioned after the game, before the game, that there was a lot to take away for them personally from this experience. Just getting that small taste, whether it was 3 months for James or 5 weeks for Dylan, that helps in the long run because now you come into next spring training, you're like, hey, I was up here and I did well. I held my own. Like now it's time to take a step and become, like a stud for this team and move this team forward and try to be, when we get to next September, next August, we're not just trying to finish off the season. We're trying to make a push. And I think that experience that they all got this year as a young squad, especially all the pitchers, not excluding, Josiah Gray and Kagavala, but finishing strong and healthy, I think is really good experience for all these guys.
You hit it right there, Bobby. And now I do want to get into some highlights and lowlights of the 2024 Nationals because, there are, we've talked about it. Overall, was it a success? I think that's a debate for another day, probably coming on later on this week. But there were a decent amount, or really a good amount of highlights in 2024 and lowlights as well. And not just highlight plays and everything, but big storylines of the season, big success, and also some failures as well. So we'll kind of tackle that here a little bit later. But today's episode, again, is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. So let's tell you about Prize Picks because, of course, you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. And if your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. And Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks can get money as quick as 15 minutes. Maybe you think that Justin Jefferson will get more than 83.5 yards next week, or maybe you think Jordan Mason can run more than 70.5 yards this season or for this next upcoming game. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. And of course, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you have your first play of a $5 lineup. Now we get back into it with Bobby Blanco from MASNsports.com. And Bobby, when talking about highlights and lowlights of the 2024 Nationals, let's start off with the good. I think the biggest highlight for me was seeing James Wood, your number one prospect, the number one prospect in all of baseball there, according to multiple different sites, and having him come up and not just come up and make some noise, but solidifying himself as someone who will be a key integral part of this future. And the reason why I say that, as it's obviously the biggest highlight in my opinion, was that we have seen top prospects come up, not just here in DC, but overall, really over the last few seasons here, like Elly De La Cruz, someone who is a cannot miss prospect. The guy is wildly talented, but still, it took some time for him to adjust offensively speaking. And he is now Elly De La Cruz as we know him now, but still Jackson Holiday as well up in Baltimore. He was a surefire number one prospect. People were thinking that he was going to come up and be an all-star right away, and he wasn't. But here in DC, James Wood came up and he made his impact well known around Major League Baseball. So when talking about highlights of this year, seeing that star player come up and be a star really instantly was probably the biggest storyline of 2024. What do you think of that? What is your highlight of 2024?
Yeah, I think that has to be the highlight. I mean, you can even, if you want to bundle him with Dylan Cruz making his debut as well, I think that's fair. But James, I mean, we can talk about Dylan and his struggles in his last taste of the major leagues. But gotta remember that was barely over a month.
Exactly.
This was his first full professional season. I mean, he was only drafted just last year. I mean, he made his debut 13 months after he was drafted. So, I don't hold that against him. I think it was more about the experience he got up here. But you look at what James did, and you mentioned some of the guys that also came up as rookies and struggled. And I think James was fairly consistent. I mean, there was a stretch where he was in a mini slump, and that happens to every ball player, no matter who you are. So I think he handled that well. I think, we've talked about this too, Ryan. A lot of the things that I saw from James Wood was his command of the strike zone and how advanced he already is. And I thought that he was getting pinched a lot, especially near the end of the season, on balls that probably should have been gone. I mean, so many of his at bats, I feel like near the end of the season, when they end up in a strikeout, there's one or two pitches in that whole at bat where it completely flips the at bat. Where instead of it being 2-1, it's 1-2 now, and now he has to take a 2-strike approach. So, I think 1, he'll adjust to that. 2, I think the league and the umpires will adjust to him. And that'll improve. But I mean, he has to be the main storyline. He was the main storyline coming into the season. When are we going to see James? When are we going to see Dylan? Remember going back to spring training out, he was crushing the ball, and we thought that James was going to make the opening day roster. We were begging for him to come up in April, May, June. He had the injury, and then finally July 1st he came up. That was the main storyline. And comparing and contrasting him to some other rookies. In 79 games for James, he hit 264, 781 OPS, 9 homers, and 41 RBIs. Yes, he struck out almost 100 times, but he almost walked 40 times. You look at Wyatt Langford, a guy that maybe always could be more connected to Dylan just because of their draft class, but he in 134 games, so over 7, basically double the amount of games that James played. He only hit 253 with a 740 OPS and only knocked in 16 homers and 74 RBI. So James and I think in less than half the games that Wyatt played put up better numbers and was on pace to have a better season than someone who might finish top 3 in Rookie of the Year voting this year. So I think that's a pretty good sign and a pretty good barometer of how James did this year. And even though his debut was delayed until July.
Yeah, you know what? Like James Wood, and we're going to talk about him a lot this offseason and kind of the steps that he will take to being an all-star kind of player and maybe even someday down the road an MVP caliber kind of player. But I think if you had questions about James Wood, we entered this season, obviously he killed the ball in spring training and people were already talking about him making the opening day lineup, which it was a real discussion at points because James Wood was the highlight of spring training. I mean, there was no doubt about that, in my opinion. You mentioned Wyatt Langford. He was as well for the Texas Rangers. So we kind of knew that the Rangers were in a win now situation coming off a World Series. So it made sense for them to bring Wyatt Langford up and have him start on that opening day roster there. But James Wood in particular, I saw what I needed to see from him in order to convince me that this guy is worthy of being a number 1 prospect. This guy is worthy of the praise and all the hype around him. He lived up to it in 2024. And when I think of the 2024 season, to also tie in the conversation that we had in that first segment, development, seeing the development of James Wood, seeing the adjustments that he made, what seemed so long ago, Bobby, and I don't even know if you maybe recall this, but I remember people were actually concerned about the fact that James Wood wasn't pulling the baseball at one point. And it was just kind of what do you mean by that? How are you concerned by James Wood not pulling the baseball? In fact, that is a good thing about what this guy did. But I do want to get into some low lights here of the season because there were some. Josiah Gray getting Tommy John, Mackenzie Gore going through his struggles, Jake Irvin the first half. I mean, legitimately, I believe on July 4th, he had a 2.8 ERA, and now he finished the season with a mid-4s ERA. So, it's a tale of 2 stories there with Jake Irvin. But really, as far as low lights go, I look at catcher Keibert Ruiz. I mean, I was expecting big things. He got in his extension last spring training before 2023, and Keibert Ruiz, defensively, he is what he is at this point. I don't think there's really going to be many progressions there behind the plate. But what I was ultimately really disappointed in was what he didn't do at the plate. Like, he was not good offensively. The power really was not there. And he did go through that stretch where he was sick and lost like nearly 20 pounds. So, I mean, the guy was really sick. He was out for a few weeks there. But overall, though, Keibert Ruiz was just kind of one of those guys where I need to see more, and I was expecting a lot more. And I was like, I always enter the season over the last few years here saying this is the year where Keibert Ruiz comes up and he's going to be a top 3 offensive kind of catcher. And because that's what people were expecting of him. And that's really what the Nationals were expecting of him as well. And we just did not see that this year. But what were some of your lowlights here?
Yeah, I think Keeber's a good one. I will say I think he had a better second half. With him, this is the second year in a row he's done this where he struggled in the first half and had a pretty decent second half.
Mm-hmm.
He needs to put it all together for one whole season, and then we can start talking about he's the catcher of the future, and he's going to be a solid backstop for them. I think my low light, unfortunately, and not to keep piling on him, but it has to be CJ Abrams. Just for not just because of how the season ended. Obviously, that was huge disappointment. But he was the all-star. He got into the game, and then he had a terrible second half. And he was trying to get it back in September. Then, of course, all of the drama off the field happened, and he got sent down. I mean, if we're talking strictly baseball things, like on the field stuff, sure, some of those other guys you mentioned can be, I think, are definitely disappointments at times. I still think Jake Irvin's overall season was good.
Mm-hmm.
I think he just got worn down at the end. So, he mentioned after that last start on Sunday that now the goal for next year is to make sure that doesn't happen and, get a little more energy for the second half of the season. But all things considered, it has to be CJ Abrams. He barely hit 200 in the second half, and that's with a strong 12 or 14 games in September. He was hitting like well below 200 entering the last month of the season. Started getting it back a little bit, and then, of course, all the off-field stuff happened. So, to me, that's the biggest storyline heading into next year. That's kind of the thing everyone's going to keep an eye on the most is how does he respond? How does he react? Is he able to put together a full, complete season like we thought he was going to at the beginning of this year? Like I said, not to keep piling on him, but it is what it is, and right now it's the biggest story for this team.
It is, and those are all great ones. And I'm a CJ Abrams mark, so I kind of like purposely left him off there, just being like CJ will be fine.
Too, but I mean,
of course, no, of course,
is what the situation is. You can't really.
It's a hard one to ignore. It really is, because he did struggle immensely, but like. I just feel as if CJ, what we saw in the first half was more real than what we saw in the second half. And maybe I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here, but I expect a big 2025 from CJ Abrams as he turns 24 over the next few days here. So we'll have plenty of offseason.
Yeah, I agree with you. From a baseball standpoint, I think he is more the player we saw in the first half than the second half. To me, it's all about how he responds to this demotion at the end of the season. Like, talked about this a week ago or whatever it happened, but like, does he go down to West Palm Beach and pout, or does he actually get back to work and come in spring training ready to prove everyone wrong? That's the big question.
That's the big question. So hopefully it's the latter and he is really good, but we'll see what CJ Abrams and see what happens there. But Bobby, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to get your World Series prediction on the record. We'll go through some of the wild card games. We've got postseason baseball starting today, and it is October 1st. Baseball is at its best right now. Before we do that, I'm going to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. And hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So you get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. I just talked with Bobby before the show. He placed a $5 bet on the Commanders at plus 290 to win the NFC East. I think that's a good bet. So when you do it, Do it with our friends over at FanDuel. Again, $200 in bonus bets are guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just download America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com. Now, let me tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. And of course, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I can tell you this, I am heading to the Commanders-Browns games this weekend, and I am checking out Game Time as we speak. In Game Time, they've got lowest price guaranteed and event cancellation protection, and of course, job loss protection as well. But as we know with Northwest Stadium nowadays, it's not the best. You can have your view obstructed. Well, Game Time, they give you the views of your seats before you even buy it, so you can see if there's any obstruction or any weird pole in front of you, or just see the angle of where you will be sitting. And of course, when you do that, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON MLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. Bobby, it is game time for playoff baseball here today as you are heading up to Baltimore here to catch the Royals and, of course, the Royals as well. That'll be a very fun one as well. You've got the Tigers and the Astros kicking off today as well at 2:30 Eastern time. The Royals and the Orioles start at 4:08. Then you've got the Mets and the Brewers at 5:32. And then tonight's really great series, in my opinion, between the Braves and the Padres. Bobby, we're not going to preview the wild card series here, but this will be the final time really before postseason baseball gets going. I feel like you have earned a World Series prediction here. You've come on basically every single week. I mean, yes, you have, in fact. But, Bobby, your World Series prediction, go.
Well, I will say, first off, I did make that Commanders bet on the FanDuel app, so thank you.
You did?
Yeah.
Big FanDuel guy.
Best odds there, so big FanDuel sportsbook guy. Yeah, I'm looking at my bracket right here. I like filling it out like as if it's March Madness. Yeah, I don't want to be too chalky in the National League, but I just don't see who matches up well against the Dodgers. I think if the Padres get past the Braves, that could be an electric series. We know their rivalry. I actually like this. I actually like if the Brewers get past the Mets, which, you know, they're either riding high after yesterday or they're going to be exhausted. But I think the Brewers can knock out the Phillies in the DS and then have a Dodgers, Brewers, NLCS. But they're just a freight train. And I think with Shohei, the season he had, what he could do. Now, this is his first taste of the postseason too. So does he live up to the hype? Who knows? But I think I'm going to be a little chalky in the National League and go Dodgers. In the American League, I actually like the Guardians. I think their bullpen is nasty. I think they are perfectly set up in terms of their bullpen for October. You know, they don't need their starters to go too deep. If they grab an early lead with Jose Ramirez and that offense, I think that they can hold on to leads late in games. And that's what you need to do in October. You need to jump out to early leads and you need to be able to hold on to them late. And I think they're built to do that. I don't know if the Yankees are able to have all the pieces together. I think Juan Soto and Aaron Judge and Garrett Cole can carry that team. I think they can carry the team, those three guys. But you need, like we saw in 19 with the Nats, you need those role player guys to step up and make big contributions. You need a Howie Kendrick and Adam Eaton, a Michael A. Taylor off the bench, something like that. I don't know if the Yankees have that. I like Guardians, Dodgers in the World Series. And I'm going to take Guardians for my family. My in-laws are big Guardians fans. I'm going to take the Guardians in 6 over the Dodgers.
Wow. That would be a fun World Series. I mean, the Guardians from being a bottom 10 team in baseball last year to being one of the better teams in the American League all season long. I mean, that would be an incredible storyline. And Major League Baseball, they'll never admit this, but They want Shohei Ohtani in the World Series.
Well, Major League Baseball wants Dodgers, Yankees.
They want Dodgers, Yankees badly.
And the last thing they want is like Royals, Padres.
Yeah.
Royals, Brewers. That's the last thing they want.
Yeah, Royals, Brewers would be – it would be like if, we're baseball fans.
Baseball fans would love it.
They would love it.
Fan, I mean, not to get too deep into it, but like remember last year – with the Diamondbacks, Phillies, NLCS, one of the lowest rated NLCSs in history. And then Diamondbacks, Rangers in the World Series was the lowest rated World Series in history. People just don't care if you're a small market team.
Exactly. They just don't. And that is like the unfortunate part of this. But I'm going to save my World Series prediction for a little bit later on. But
no, you got to do it today. You can't do your World Series prediction after the postseason already starts. You can't be like, you can't watch Corbin Burns shove today like Orioles.
Okay.
You got to do your prediction before the postseason actually starts.
Yes, fair. I was gonna go through and do my wild card predictions today.
All right, do
but
that.
You know what? All right, fine. You know what? You're right. I'll do it. I'll do it right now, and I'll have my reasoning for it later on the podcast tomorrow's show. But
do that.
My World Series prediction is Padres Yankees.
Damn.
I think the Padres are a sleeping giant right now. I mean, the Padres bullpen is elite. I mean, some of the same reasons that you use the Guardians for, like, I think the Padres are a legit juggernaut that just people have not been watching them. Their offense can be lethal. I mean, San Diego, that home environment is a very tough one to play. I think Atlanta's in for a very tough 3-game series here. I think they probably get swept. Michael King is on the bump tonight for the Padres. Like, this is going to be a very tough series for them. I don't see the Braves lasting, and I think the Padres in their bullpen is so deep that, like, if they were to have a bullpen game, no problem for them. Like, they will go in there, and ever since the Padres-Nats series that was just hectic with Jerks and Profar, they have been like the 2019 Nationals. They have been the hottest team in baseball since then. I mean, they really gave the Dodgers a run for their money at the end in the last few weeks here of who could win the NL West, but the Dodgers did pull away with that lead as we all expected. But I think the Padres and the Yankees face off, and the Yankees, for everything that you said, Juan Soto, Aaron Judge, Garrett Cole. I mean, they have got a lot of horses in that rotation as well. They've got a pretty solid bullpen to speak of as well. I mean, they've got pieces all up and down that lineup. Gleyber Torres has been on fire recently. I think he's one of those role guys who could really kind of come up and make a huge impact in the postseason. So I've got the Yankees and the Padres, and I've got the Padres winning in 7 games. I think it's their year. I'm not a Padres guy. I hate the Padres. Like,
Nats fans all hate the Padres now.
Yeah, seriously. I think all Nats fans do as well. So I've got Yankees, Padres. And I've got the Padres winning in 7 games, but I do kind of hope like Yankees Dodgers would be awesome. It'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, it'd be. I mean, and that honestly would be insane. It'd be very cool.
Or Yankees Phillies. I'll even admit that Yankees Phillies would be really cool. It would suck, but like I'd root for the Yankees.
Any 3 of those teams making the World Series isn't great for anybody. I don't think.
Yeah.
Who live around here. But yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say the Padres really got going when they swept the Nats in San Diego, and I was there for that series. That was tough. And then they came back to DC and swept them again. Dylan Cease throws a no-hitter. Yeah, I mean, if the Padres do what you think they're going to do, we can look back at this and say the Nats kind of kickstarted the Padres run to a championship.
Yeah, seriously. Shout out to Mackenzie Gore for pummeling Jerks and Profar. that's what started that whole thing.
Mackenzie Gore should pull a Ron Rivera, ask for a ring.
Yeah, exactly. That's a deep cut there. And if you're a Commanders fan out there, I know you'll appreciate that one. So, all right. Well, Bobby, always appreciate it, man. And it was a fun one today.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking more about the offseason.
Of course. And you enjoy Baltimore's postseason baseball action today. Maybe you get a little bird bath out there. So
those natty bows on.
Yeah, they Hon. Come on, Hon. Baltimore, Hon. I can't really do a Baltimore accent, but all right, that's it. We are way past our deadline. That is Bobby Blanco from MASNsports.com. I'm Ryan Clary from Locked On Nationals. Catch Bobby over on Twitter at Bobby_Blanco. Read his work at MASNsports.com. And we will catch you guys on the flip side. I will talk to you tomorrow and explain more as to why I think it's going to be the Padres and the Yankees and why I think the Padres win the World Series. I'll discuss that on tomorrow's show of Locked On Nationals. Have a good one. I'll see you tomorrow.